Hey everybody, so today I want to show you the steps so that you can create your own plaster pumpkin. We're going to need a couple of supplies. We're going to need plastic bags from the grocery store, old newspaper, tape, string, scissors, and then our plaster. The first step that we're going to do is we're going to take our newspaper and we are going to crumple it up and fill up a plastic bag. When you're filling your plastic bag with your newspaper, you want to open up the newspaper all the way and then crumple it. This is going to make it so it fills your bag more with less pieces of newspaper. Let's get started. So I have my bag filled up with newspaper. Now I want to shape it a little bit. So I'm going to push in the edges that are a little bit lopsided, and I'm going to bring up the handles closer to the top. And now we're ready for the next step. So our next step is to take both of our handles and tie them at the top. This is what's going to form our stem of the pumpkin. The main thing that I want to do now is tape my handles together. So I'm going to take my masking tape and I'm going to tape around the handle. Now that I have my stem all taped up, I can shape it how I would like. So if I want to move it, if I want to kind of twist it a little bit so that it's more wonky rather than straight up and down. If it's too long of a stem, I can always take my scissors and I can cut any of the extra off. What you also want to do now is secure the top and tape up any of the openings that you might have up at the very top. You want everything to be closed up with a little bit of tape. Also, on the bottom, I like to tape these little sections down so that they're not poking out along the side. So I take a little bit of tape and I just secure these extra flaps of plastic and I tape them down. Our next step is to take our string or yarn and to create the indents. So let's cut our yarn up into an equal amount of pieces. You want to make sure it's long enough so when you wrap it around your pumpkin, you'll have extra to tie at the top. I like to cut my yarn in about 4 pieces. What you're gonna do first is you're gonna lay out your string. I like to do it in an X shape first, and then I put one down the center of the X. Once those are set up like a star, I put a little piece of tape in the middle so that they don't move. Now I can place my pumpkin on top, and I'm going to bring up the edges of my yarn and tie them in the center. You want to pull a little bit tighter so that it creates the indentation. And if you need someone to help you hold your string while you tie it, ask a friend for some help. Then you're just going to go opposite end of your yarn to the other. Pull it tight and then tie it in a double knot. So what I like to do with all of my extra pieces of string is I like to take them all together and then I'll tie them around the bottom of my stem. If there's extra, then I can take that and I can just snip off any of the extra. If you want to secure the sections of your pumpkin even more, you can take your masking tape and you can create larger indentations by taking your tape and pressing it along that indentation. You can put your tape here and you can tape it along the bottom to make sure that the string stays in place. The last thing that you can do before we start putting our plaster on is to add another layer of tape to your stem, just in case you want to really attach all of those little pieces of tape to the top. So now that we have our pumpkin all shaped up and taped up, we are ready to start putting plaster on top of our pumpkin. This is when I like to get an apron on because things will get messy. This is our plaster that we're going to use. It comes in a big long sheet. It's plaster that has been put onto fabric. When we use our plaster, we're going to cut it into strips and then we're going to dip it into the water. Warm water will make your plaster dry faster, and then cool water will have it dry slower. When you have your water ready to go, you're going to dip your plaster strip into it, then squeegee off the extra water so it's not dripping. Then place it onto your pumpkin and smooth out any of those little holes with your finger. If you don't fill in all the holes, that's okay, but you do want to make sure that the plaster is pushed down onto the pumpkin. One more time. You're going to take your plaster strip, dip it all the way into the water, squeegee off the extra water in between your fingers, and then lay it onto your pumpkin and smooth it out. Some important things about plaster. Number one, if you need to cut it into smaller strips, cut it into smaller strips. Don't try and make a giant strip of plaster because it might be difficult to work with something that's very large. Don't leave the plaster strips sitting in the water. If you're gonna do that, the plaster will eventually just disintegrate off and you'll be left with just the fabric and no plaster. Make sure when you dip your plaster into the water, you don't immediately put it onto your pumpkin. You need to squeegee that extra water off so it's not a drippy mess. You're gonna continue dipping, squeegeeing, and laying your strips of plaster until the whole thing has at least 2 layers of plaster. So let's go ahead and do the top of our pumpkin. Once you're done covering the top part of your pumpkin, you want to go in and you want to wrap your stem with your plaster strips as well. So go ahead and patch up any holes that you see that you can still fill while the pumpkin is upright, and then you're gonna let it sit for about 10 to 15 minutes until it's completely dry, and then you can flip it over to do the bottom. So while the top of your pumpkin is drying, you can take this time to cut up more plaster strips if you need them, and to clean up around your table if you made a big mess. Now that our pumpkin's dry, we can flip it over and we can start covering the bottom. You want to be careful of your stem. You don't want to press down too hard when you flip it over. So you just want to have it rest on the stem, and then you're going to start covering the bottom of your pumpkin. So when you are done covering the bottom, make sure you've put enough layers on so that it's going to be nice and sturdy. You can leave your pumpkin upside down on your tray so that the bottom will dry. After that's dry, then we can start painting. So I've let my pumpkin dry for a couple hours now and everything is nice and hardened. And I'm ready to paint my pumpkin with the colors that I've chosen. So you want to grab some paint, water, a paper towel, and then some brushes, and you're ready to get started. So to add a little bit more depth and dimension to your pumpkin, you can take a slightly darker color to paint within the indentations. So how I'm going to do that is I'm going to mix the orange that I painted on the pumpkin with a little bit of a brown. Then what you're going to do is you're going to pick where you want to start, and in the indentation you're going to paint your slightly darker color. If you decide that some of these lines are too dark, you can always go back in with your original orange or original color that you used at the beginning. Some things to consider when you're painting: you want to make sure that you fill in all of the little holes that the plaster could have left behind. You can do that by either tapping your brush or just using enough layers of paint so that it fills in all of those holes or cracks. So just like how I put the darker paint in the indentation, I could do the opposite, and I could add some lighter orange on the parts that bump out of the pumpkin to just give a little bit of highlight. I could make that color by mixing orange and yellow or orange and white. Before I paint the bottom of my pumpkin, I want to make sure that I paint my stem as well. I think I'm going to do a little bit of green and brown mixed together. Now that the top of my pumpkin has been painted, I can either dry it with a hair dryer or a fan, or wait for it to dry naturally. Then I can flip it over and I can paint the bottom. And here is the final finished pumpkin. I hope that you like doing this project. You can paint it whatever color you want, and you could add any designs or patterns or even a jack-o'-lantern face to the front of it.